Well, this is Dick, and I'm with Pa, and we're going to talk about the Klostermans here. Pa, how many children were in your family, and tell us a little bit about Ashton and Templeton.
Well, there are 12 children in our family. At this time, there are 11. One died with multiple sclerosis a number of years ago. And at Ashton, my family, there were 12 children. And we came to Ashton from Templeton in 1901. And, well, I don't know what to say now.
What about the farm at Templeton?
That was a half-section farm. It was very hilly. And Dad sold that farm because he couldn't get water. He had 16 wells and didn't have enough water for his cattle. And, but I understand that by this time they found out they had to go down about 800 feet. Then they have water. But,
well, now, he liked the farm at Ashton. Now, there was a racetrack on that, too, wasn't there?
Years ago, there was a racetrack there. And a man bred thoroughbred horses there. And, but that was all done away with by the time we got there.
This Patterson had a racetrack where the gravel pit is, didn't he? And then he moved up to where, at Worthington?
Worthington, Minnesota, and he went into the butcher and horse business, raising draft horses. And he stayed there for quite a number of years, and he finally landed in Louisiana and bought land down there and moved down there.
Tell us a little about your parents, Pa.
Well, my parents were born at New Vienna, Iowa, and they're very close together at places, about a mile apart. And my mother was married at 16, and my father was married, I think, at about 22, 23 years of age. And they immediately moved to Carroll County, Templeton, Iowa. And they stayed there until 1901. And I think there were 12 children in the family, and they adopted one besides. And they migrated in all directions. And one of them that died as a result of exposure to the weather at the night of the Chicago fire in 1871. They could see that fire from New Vienna, Iowa, and didn't know what it was. And they stood out and watched it, and he got pneumonia and died. And
there was what, Tony, Frank, Barney, Casper, and Joe that you remember. Do you remember where Tony is, or Frank, or where do these fit in?
They're all dead. These are all dead now.
Are there any relatives around here that are descendants of any of these boys?
These relatives here are all Joe's sons. Joe.
That would be Danny and...
No, these relatives here, Charlie.
Oh, Charlie. Yeah, I see. And Joe and Leo. And
yeah, they are all...
They're Joe's relatives, come from the Joe Klosterman family. Uh-huh.
Joe Klosterman's, that is their father and mother, and my father and mother were brother and sister, see? That is, the women were sisters, and the men were brothers.
You mentioned that the family adopted one child, and you mentioned she was Irish, and...
She was of Irish descent. but she adapted to German readily, which was the common language at the time.
Was she an infant?
Yeah.
The Bishop of Dubuque just brought the child out.
Well, he just told him to. Now don't put this on now.
Maybe you should tell us the name of your parents.
My dad's name was Barney.
Mother's?
Mother's name was Rosa. R-O-S-A. Bonenkamp. And
What can you tell us about the family over in Germany and how they got to this country and ended up in Iowa?
well, my grandfather was a seafaring man. He had a bunch of boys growing up, and he didn't want them to be seafaring people. So he went to the village priest and asked him what he should do. And the priest says, go to America. So they booked passage and on a sailing boat and started for America. And most of the passengers on the sailing boat got very ill, dysentery, from they never had prunes before, and they would feed them all the prunes they wanted, and they get the real dysentery, diarrhea, and they couldn't eat for days. And by the time they got ready to eat again, they'd eat some more prunes and over. And but my ancestors knew enough about this to stay away from the prunes. They had no trouble. But anyhow, they landed at Baltimore, and my great-great-grandmother died in Baltimore and is buried there. Now, how they got down to the Ohio River, I don't know. But they got down to the Ohio River and went down to Cairo, Illinois, then got to Mississippi and went north on the Mississippi up to Dubuque, Iowa. From there on, there was a German settlement about 30 miles west of Dubuque that the great-grandfather headed for. And he headed out during the night. Being a seafaring man, he could navigate by the stars. He missed over the hilly country and forest going through there. He missed his destination only 1 mile. And they settled there. And this all had to be cleared. All this land had to be cleared. And an awful lot of hard work there. The Klostermans, and I presume the Bonenkamps, came from Oldenburg in Germany. And landed, of course, at New Vienna, Iowa. One of Dad's uncles moved to New Richmond, Minnesota, in Stearns County, to get to New Wheatland. Another one moved into the Minot, North Dakota area. And another one jumped ship off the coast of South America, and they heard from a few years, and that was the end of that. That's as far as I can go with that.
Why don't you mention it?
This one brother that jumped ship off of the coast of South America made him liable for the charge of mutiny, which means death. In any event, the captain imposes a sentence. Asked Dad once if he remembered the Civil War, and he said no, only He remembered that his Uncle Frank was with Sherman's march to the sea. And it was a total destructive process. They lived off the land, and the first thing they would do, they'd have a pincher's movement, destroy everything, and then they would raid the liquor supply in the basement. They'd get good and drunk, and in this one particular case, one fella got good and drunk, and then he went upstairs, and Dad's Uncle Frank got in a quarrel with him on account of this. So the fellow pulled a sword out and cut his thumb out, and he remembers that when this Dad's Uncle Frank was discharged from the army on account of this disability. That's as far as that goes.
What about the blackberry brandy? How did that figure in this thing, and the dysentery?
Well, the dysentery was a common problem those days, and in Sherman's march to the sea, that whole area was covered with wild blackberries, and anyone that fell disabled into a wild blackberry patch and lived off of blackberries would recover. Those that didn't died.
The people were sympathetic with the South, weren't they, in eastern Iowa a little bit, this German settlement?
German settlement was sympathetic to the South, and it was custom at that time that you could buy, if you were drafted, you could buy a substitute to serve in the army in your place. And my grandfather was one that carried the money, and another man went with him, could speak English, and they would, the market was at Galena, Illinois, which was not too far away. And you could buy a substitute for $300. That was the common thing.
Where did these substitutes come from?
I don't know. I don't have any idea. I imagine they were new immigrants looking for a job.
They got into a little bit of a fight one day, didn't they, over this?
Oh, yes. My grandfather was not a farmer. He was a school teacher, although he had a man that did the farming for him. But this man went to the mill where they milled their wheat, and you had to wait in line for your turn. It was a very cold day, and being sympathetic to the South, he got in an argument with a man, and the rumor was that they caught Jefferson Davis, and this hired man said that they didn't catch Jefferson Davis, and they won't catch him. So they got into a fight, and this man got beat up good and plenty. So he sits out there on the wagon wheel a while and thinks it over, and he comes back into the office, and they would have a poker they would keep red hot to light their pipe. So he stuck that poker in the stove, he got it red hot, and he licked the other fellow with that red hot poker.
You mentioned one time that some of the Melchers had walked across Iowa 3 times. Why don't we talk about that?
Well, old Mike Melcher, who was a young man at that time, and his sister Maggie lived in Monona County, Iowa, which is on the eastern edge of Iowa, and they decided to walk west and look for land. They went to Ashton. The land looked all right, they walked back to Monona, and then they helped move everything to Ashton. They made 3 trips across the state of Iowa, which I would estimate would be at least 250 miles of walking each way.
Tell us a little bit about your dad's, Grandpa's, land dealings in his lifetime. The southern part of the country, how he went on trips, and the Iona project, and so forth.
Well, Dad was a great man to look for new land, and different land. When he decided to leave Templeton, he and Theodore Storman went to Iona, Minnesota to look at land. They both bought a farm there, but Dad's deal fell through. And so the next year Dad bought at Ashton. But he was a great man to buy land and sell land. He had, in his lifetime, he had 22 different farms. And that's where he made his money, his own land speculation.
He had been south, hadn't he, on tours that were set up by different peoples?
Well, he was at McAllen, Texas at one time, into South Dakota different times, Minnesota different times, all over. And home always looked best to him.
They used to, he had to wait for what, a week down south one time for the rain to clear up, and they'd take him out to a farm and give him cook that could really cook food, and in other words, it was kind of a set-up deal for these people, wasn't it?
It wasn't exactly that way as I understand it. But this was going through Kansas. And of course they had nothing but horses to drive, livery teams. And they'd come to a place, and it was about noon. The man looked at his watch and he'd say, well, it's about noon. I wonder if we could get anything to eat here. And the thing was all set up with these people, apparently. And they would ask at the house, well, the wife would say, we haven't got anything ready, but I guess we can take care of you. And they put up the swellest meals.
How many people were in this party that came?
I don't know how many there were. Oh, more than half in this group. And then the landlady would ask this lady, did you raise all this? Oh, yes, I raised this all. I canned it all. And it was all drummed up by the landladies.
He used to own a farm in Iowa that got flooded so bad, didn't he? He had some low land on it, and they'd have to wait for the water to go off. Where was that at?
That was at Rodman, Iowa. He and his brother Tony owned a section there that the little Missouri, a little Des Moines River to run through it. Little Des Moines River would overflow, and the banks, or the edge by the bank, was higher than it couldn't run back. And he said he was there one time, it just smelled awful with dead fish laying there. They couldn't get back in. Dad was a great one to go on these land excursions. There's one trip in particular that, I think it was in McAllen, Texas. The promoter came in there and talked to Dad about it. It was about as cheap as living it at home even. So he called home to Mother and he said, Ma, can you be ready in a half hour? We're going to Texas. She said yes. So they went to Texas. They drove around the country there. This was irrigated at that time already. Drove around the country there, and they were asking $400 an acre for that land. And from Ashton was Dad and Ole McDowell, who was the land agent and a good friend of Dad's. They went. And as they were driving through the country, there was a sign up along the road. Said, this farm for sale for $225 an acre. So at night they would have a booster session by the agent, and somebody mentioned, you're asking $450 an acre for this land, and here was a sign up that said this farm for sale for $225 an acre. How come? And the agent said that wasn't land. It said there was a team of mules for sale for $225 an acre, $225. So Dad got back to Ashton, and there was a man living there by the name of Leo Marks that had a brother living there at McAllen. And they got talking about this land at McAllen, and this Leo Marks said that his brother wanted to sell out, and he had a sign up alongside of the land offering it for sale for $225 an acre. And one night somebody stole that.